Welcome to It's Your Ego, Stupid, a show lovingly intended for millions of spiritual, intelligent, and imperfect people like you who may at times be led into ego stupidity, a lesser version of yourself and a lesser version of life. This show will give you a much deeper understanding of what ego is, what it's doing to your life, how it can weaken your human and spiritual wellness, and how you can heal in each of these areas if needed. It's Your Ego, Stupid will heighten your awareness of the intense link between your ego and spirit, your humanity and divinity, and the synergy that can lead to the best version of you and your life. Your host is Dr. Nick Martin, a licensed psychologist who has worked in the clinical, university, school, and private practice settings over the past 40 years, while serving as a therapist, diagnostician, educator, and consultant. Welcome again to It's Your Ego, Stupid. And now your host, Dr. Nick Martin.
Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Nick Martin, and thank you for listening to It's Your Ego, Stupid. I hope you've had a great week as you go about meeting the many challenges of your daily life. As the intro said, this is a program lovingly intended for spiritual, intelligent, and imperfect people like you and me, who may at times be led by our ego, and more specifically, our ego energy, into something I call ego stupidity, a lesser version of ourselves, and a lesser version of life. Ego stupidity that is weakening relationships with our husband, wife, or partner, perhaps our son or daughter, maybe our brother or sister, and even with ourselves. Ego stupidity that's making it difficult to deal effectively with all of the inevitable changes, adversity, stressors, and conflicts that happen in all of our lives. Ego stupidity making it difficult to grow our mind with truth while keeping us stuck in faulty beliefs, values, attitudes, prejudices, and illusions. And finally, ego stupidity that's making it difficult to feel genuine, lasting happiness, while often leading us into unneeded or inappropriate anxiety, anger, guilt, depression, or something I call fake happiness, which many often use as a substitute for the real thing. If things aren't going well, or perhaps as well as you'd like, you've come to the right place, because a lot of what's going wrong, or perhaps not as well as we'd like, has something to do with our ego energy, which is serving as the fuel for ego stupidity. It's often the unseen and unrecognized source of what's going wrong in our life, both humanly and spiritually. This is a lesson I've learned from thousands of people, just like you, over the past 40 years. You've taught me with your lives, your relationships, and your experiences what no theorist, books, or schools of psychology could teach me about ego. You have been my teachers. Well, it's a brand new day, and the days of living in the darkness of what ego energy is doing in and to our lives, both humanly and spiritually, are over. My programs are intended to shine lots of light on all of this. They're intended to help us heal our ego energy with ego medicine, when and where needed. Again, thank you for tuning into It's Your Ego, Stupid. And before we get started, I want to answer a question I received from Mary in Seattle last week. Thank you, Mary, for the question. The question is how did I get the title for my show? This title is a follow-on from the aha moment, a moment of clarity that I experienced after 12 years of working with people in the clinical setting. That moment being summarized as, it's their ego, stupid, which captured the idea that so much of the difficulty and the problems that people were having had ego as their source, and that I was being shown over and over and over again, and it was as if this thought was also saying, when are you going to catch on? And that thought was a beginning point to my journey of unearthing ego. And so the title for the show in my last book was Extending the Thought Hour to People, trying to draw their attention to it and encouraging them to unearth their ego and the ego stupidity taking place in very important areas of their life. Again, thank you, Mary, for your question. And if you have a question anyone else does, please send it to the contact page of my website, egoandspirit.info. During our program last week, we began to look more deeply at the important area of loving yourself. I have found that this is probably the most important of all the ones I talk about because it seems to have an impact upon all the other ones. And it also has an effect on our spiritual wellness, obviously. So things like how we work with conflict and how we achieve, how we go about dealing with relationships all seem to have something to do with how well we can love ourselves. And during our program last week, we talked about people who were experiencing lower ego power energy, who are feeling very disempowered in their life, and the difficulty they have in being able to love themselves and to feel loved by others in healthy ways. Well, during today's program, we're going to switch gears and we're going to take a look at the difficulty that people with higher ego power experience in their ability to love themselves and others in healthy ways. These are people who are over-empowered and often have too much ego power that they're exerting in their life. We're going to be looking at the symptoms of difficulty in this area, the reflections of ego stupidity that often happen, the insights that are needed to shine light on what's happening below the surface at the roots, and ego's impact on our spiritual wellness, our ability to be the love, the life, and the energy God is when higher ego power is at work. We're going to look to see if you or somebody you know is experiencing any or several of the symptoms and reflections of ego stupidity that I'm going to be talking about. There are millions of people that have this difficulty, as there are billions of people on the planet, and every one of them has an ego, just like you and I do. This is a difficulty that people around the world, and some of them are living in the roles of dictator or narcissist within their life, or perhaps living as a bully or a rebel or a control freak, who are experiencing difficulty loving themselves and loving others in healthy ways. And this particular difficulty has a lot more to do with their ego energy and a lot less to do with mental illness, intellectual stupidity, or the absence of spirituality. So now we're going to take a look at some of the symptoms that reflect the effects of higher ego power on this person's ability to like themselves, to love themselves, and to love others in healthy ways. These symptoms can serve as a beginning point for you to consider whether you, or maybe somebody you know, are encountering this difficulty, and if there is a need to improve on loving yourself and others. I want you to diagnose you, because you are the only one living you. So we start with the very first symptom. People with higher ego power are often in love with themselves and think others should be in love with them. Okay, they are not in a healthily loving place, but they are in love with themselves. And they really want other people to, quote, be in love with them. And here are some questions that maybe you might want to consider that could take you closer to seeing whether this symptom is at work or not. People with higher ego power, do you often tell yourself how great you are? How great you are. People with higher ego power do that a lot. They remind themselves about how good they are, how great they are. Another question, do you think others should recognize you as being special? People with higher ego power often want other people to acknowledge their, quote, specialness, how strong or how good or smart or whatever that is about themselves. Also, do you want or do you ask people to acknowledge your greatness or to tell them to see how great you are? You're actually, in some cases, pointing it out, that you're asking them to notice, to recognize, to acknowledge what is very good or special about you. Now, I know this kind of sounds silly for some people, but if that's me, you're not living necessarily in that person's energy. When people are in that energy and stuck in that energy, they often have a difficult time seeing what's really going on, and something that I call the abnormal normal. So that's the first symptom. Another symptom for people with higher ego power is that they think it's more important to love themselves than it is to love others. They think it's more important to love themselves than it is to love others. So, do you make distinctions about who should be loved more and who should be loved less? Instead of everybody being loved equally, the person with higher ego power looks at it as sort of like a hierarchy, and they have to be at the top end of that hierarchy. Another question, do you make sure to treat yourself better than others, not equally? So it's important for you to give yourself more and maybe to give other people less, to, in a way, love yourself more and to love others less. Also, do you make sure you give more to yourself than others? And it's often much more. So you want to leave no doubt, if you're that high ego power person, who is more worthy of being loved. And in this case, you're giving more stuff to yourself in an effort to demonstrate that, yes, I am more lovable. I should be loved more. So maybe you're at the party, the function, and they give everybody one scoop of ice cream, and you make sure you get two because you want to send a message to yourself and to everybody else. I'm more important than everybody else, and I need to love myself more. And maybe you should too. All right, another symptom, the third one we'll talk about, is that people with higher ego power can never get enough love from themselves or others. They need constant love. They need to be reminded of love, and they do it for themselves or they need to get it from others. It's almost like a drug that they never can get enough of. So are you the kind of person who can never hear enough from yourself or others about how great you are? You know, you can't get enough kind or loving words or applause or acknowledgement in whatever form it comes, compliments, of some kind. Do you make demands on others to tell you how great you are? So in some cases, people with higher ego power believe they can actually tell people. They can actually make demands upon people to be acknowledging how great they are, how important they are, how significant they are. Also, do you feel down or unhappy when you haven't heard it? It's as if you are taking a little bit of a vacation, not purposefully, because you don't want that. You want to be loved. But when people aren't saying it and you want to hear it, and you become upset or down or maybe even angry. So that's the third symptom. Another symptom, people with higher ego power think others owe them love and should love them because of how great they are. So the person with higher ego power almost looks upon love as a commodity. It's something that others need to give to me because I really deserve it. And so in this particular symptom, do you often ask or tell people to love you? You just point it out directly that they should be telling you and acknowledging you in some way, shape, or form about their love for you. Also, do you feel that you are honoring people with your presence? Just they should be thankful that I'm around them, that they have an opportunity to be in my midst, so to speak. Do you get angry with people who aren't giving you the love you think you deserve in recognition of your special qualities? Whether you're an athlete or an artist or a politician or somebody who has some kind of status, and you almost feel like you have a right, you're entitled to be angry for people's failure to know you or to acknowledge you. Another symptom of reflective of this is that people with higher ego power, they often magnify loving words or gestures from others, and they see them as being greater signs of love than was intended. So, somebody might be offering them a normal, healthy acknowledgement or compliment, and somehow this becomes blown up by the higher ego power person. It's something much larger, a much more reflection of that love this other person has for them. So do you exaggerate positive words or gestures? You make them out to mean more than they do? Or do you think people are in love with you when maybe they're just being nice, just being decent, being appropriate? Do you feel more empowered when you hear them and maybe disempowered when you don't hear them? I'm going to talk about one more symptom. People with higher ego power get angry with people who they think are withholding love from them. So, do you complain when people aren't showing you the love you think you deserve to hear? And do you complain about it often? Do you constantly remind people that this is something they should be doing? Do you think that love is a debt owed to you? As I said earlier, it's kind of like a commodity, and it's something that you deserve to get from other people because of who you are. Before we go on into our first break, I want to mention that you don't have to have all of the symptoms or experience them all of the time to be experiencing higher ego power. But the more symptoms that you do have, and the more often they happen, the more strongly they suggest that you are experiencing higher ego power energy that needs to be healed with ego medicine. And also, you'll need to consider the symptoms over time to get a clear picture of what's going on, because our ego energy can hide quite well from us, even though it's often in plain sight for others to see, if not ourselves. Because those other people around us, they aren't looking at you through the same ego energy prism that you are. And that's something I'll be talking about later. We're going to go to our first break. You're listening to It's Your Ego Stupid. This is Dr. Nick, and I'll see you after the break.
Conscious media for conscious minds. OMTimes. Being a radio host on IOM-FM allows you to build your show on a rich platform with the power of the internet to fulfill your outreach goals and connect with a very specialized and global online audience, unlimited by time and distance. OMTimes Radio will provide you with web relevance, a recognizable conscious brand, and with the standard of excellence that has accompanied every single OMTimes endeavor. Host your show with OMTimes Radio Network.
My name is Victor Furman. Some call me The Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio, and we'll explore these topics and so much more on Destination Unlimited.
Hi, Dr. Nick Martin here. I want to invite you to visit my website, egoandspirit.info, where you can find lots of information on ego and download your free ebook copy of It's Your Ego Stupid. Fix it to fix your life. Also, please visit the shop page where you can find each of my other books, Ego Therapy, Ego Spiritualism, and The Two Voices Within.
A social distancing tip.
Putting distance between yourself and others is critical to slowing the spread of coronavirus. So here are ways to stay in contact without the physical contact part. Call, send a text, set up a video conference, post on social media, dedicate a song on the radio. If you have symptoms of fever, dry cough, and shortness of breath, call your healthcare provider before going to their office. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part, because we're all #alone together. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Welcome back. You're listening to It's Your Ego Stupid, a program for intelligent, spiritual, and imperfect people, just like you and me. Now we're going to take a look at ego stupidity and what is happening in a higher ego power person's ability to love themselves, and their ability to love others, and to be loved by others in healthy ways. As a reminder, ego stupidity is happening when we are engaging in ego-rooted, that is, ego energy-rooted, non-reality-based thoughts and feelings and behaviors that we form, not ego. We are, as I've said before, intelligent, spiritual, and mentally stable people who have gotten caught up in the web of an abnormal world of our own making, consisting of thoughts and feelings and behaviors that we create from our higher ego power something I refer to as our abnormal normal can start to develop. So now, and we often don't know that, we're not realizing it, and we can remain stuck there until we heal it with ego medicine. So now we're going to talk about some specific examples and reflections of ego stupidity. You think you are a greater, better, and superior to others. You think you're a greater, better, or superior person than to others. This is the thought that people with higher ego power energy are often experiencing. And it's a non-reality based thought because it isn't true. That is, no one is necessarily greater or better or superior to others. And I'm talking about in the many ways that higher ego power persons tend to think about themselves. Certainly, we all may have certain strengths and abilities that are well developed, but this is really a much more generalized way of looking at oneself and looking, at who they are and how they are. That reinforces this idea of loving myself more because I am greater and I am better and I am superior to others. So this is a reflection, again, of ego stupidity because it's at a distance from the reality-based understanding that we are all equal. No one is truly better or greater in all these other ways that sometimes people with higher ego power would think. Another reflection of ego stupidity is you often think you think others think that about you, meaning in your head you think that other people who surround you are also looking at you in the same way, that they have the same impression of your being greater than them or anybody, or better or superior to others. And that's probably a non-reality based thought. Now, you might be surrounded by a few people who are into adoration or idealization, or who are sycophants, who have a need to think those things. Perhaps there's a secondary gain for doing it. But most people do not think that about you. But you think they think that about you. And that's the non-reality based thinking. That is the ego stupidity. That is what's at a distance from reality that's going on. Another reflection. You engage in lots of overly confident, cocky, disrespectful, and arrogant thoughts and behaviors. This is a behavioral reflection of ego stupidity, where you are putting yourself out there in a very intense way as being better than, and you act that way, and putting other people down, being disrespectful, in a way unloving of others, obviously, and expressing arrogant thoughts and behaviors. That's all reflective of ego stupidity. Now, a lot of times the person who is doing this, the high ego power person, they don't realize that. They don't see that as ego stupidity. They don't even probably know what that is, but it's part of their abnormal normal. Those things are normal. Disrespecting other people, telling other people about how great you are. Most healthy human beings realize that's not right. We don't go around bragging totally about how great we are. That's just not connected to a healthy person's way of living and being in the world, and particularly in relating to other people. But this is what's going on for a smart and a spiritual and a mentally well person. They're still caught up in this ego stupidity, and it happens a lot. Another reflection of ego stupidity is that you think you deserve to love yourself more than others. So the thought you carry around, whether you're conscious of it or you're not conscious of it, is that you deserve to love yourself more than others. And that's at a distance from reality. That's a non-reality based thought that's recycling in your head, because no one deserves to love themselves more than others. We should be loving each other and loving ourselves as much as we love others, and vice versa. So this is what I mean by a non-reality based, ego rooted, because it's coming from the power that the person has. It feeds in their sense of empowerment by doing that. People to prove their love for you. You want people to prove their love for you, and you make them, or you ask them to prove that they love you. which is a ego-rooted, non-reality-based behavior that you're engaging in. Meaning that the idea that people have to prove they love you, that's ego stupidity, because nobody has to prove anything to you or me about whether they love us or not. And it's not something they can do, because love is unconditional when it's truly love. So you're putting a condition on other people in regards to the way they go about proving that they love you. That's not something that healthy people ask other people to do. Also, you may interpret people responding to your demand or person, and I'm saying you need to show me you love me, and you need to do X, Y, or Z, and the person does X, Y, or Z, and then you come away thinking, wow, they really love me. But the answer is, or the reality is, no, they don't. That's an ego-rooted, non-reality-based thought, because it's in the service of your ego power to feel more loved by somebody than maybe you thought they did. And the reality is they don't really do love you anymore. In fact, they may resent you and be quite angry for putting that responsibility, that condition upon them. Okay, a few more reflections. You compare the amount of love given to you with what you think you should have been given. So people with higher ego power, because really love and control are and love, control, and power are all overlapping. So you're actually comparing the love that people are giving to you with the amount of power they should be giving to you, or empowerment they should be giving to you. And you kind of keep track of that. Love is very much a transactional experience for you. And another thing, the reflection of ego stupidity, is you like to tell people how much you are loved by other people. So you engage in this ego stupidity, this ego-rooted, non-reality-based behavior of announcing to the world how much other people think about you and how much other people love you. Almost as if you're trying to tell them, you really should be doing what they're doing. You should really be loving me the way they love me. Again, I think healthy people out there probably realize, that doesn't make any sense. That's kind of dumb, for people to do that. But that's not part of what the higher ego powered person thinks. They think that's very much appropriate, even if somebody were to point that out. And also, you think that people owe you love. You think people owe you love. It's another reflection of ego stupidity. It's as if, because who you are and what you are and how special you are, you think people owe you love. And that's a non-reality based thought, because people don't owe you anything when it comes to love. Love is something that's freely given. It's unconditional. It's connective. It's unburdened. It's unlimited. But it's not something we can force people to do. So these are some reflections of ego stupidity. And as we leave our focus on them, and these are reflected in a person's thoughts and feelings and behaviors, just ask yourself if you see any of this taking place within your life. Now I want to share some broader insights, and these are like a thread tying together all of those symptoms I've just talked about and the reflections of ego stupidity. There's a linkage there across all of them. And I want to say that we're all looking at our life and ourselves and our thoughts and our behaviors and our feelings through what I call a prism or a filter of ego energy. So all those things that I just mentioned earlier, the higher ego powered person will be looking at them as if there is a filter, there is a prism. And that prism is made up of power, flexibility, and vulnerability. And it's what's causing a person, if that's you, to see the abnormal things as normal rather than abnormal in your life. Abnormal. And when that prism is made up, it's an ego energy prism, as I said. And when that prism is made up of healthy, balanced ego energy involving power and flexibility and vulnerability, we can form a tight connection with human and divine truth. And you might be asking, well, how do you know if that's happening? Well, the simplest and the best answer I can give you is that things are going well in the 10 important or key life areas I talk about, meaning that we can see things as they truly are, for better or worse. But ultimately, being in good contact with reality and with truth is a very good thing, because it's the foundation for living a great life, both humanly and spiritually. But when that prism is made up of unhealthy, imbalanced ego energy, we are getting a distorted and inaccurate version of reality, while gaining distance from human and divine truth. And this is happening even though we are spiritual, intelligent, and mentally well persons. And for people with higher ego power, it's often overruling your ability to see the symptoms, the ego stupidity, and the abnormality going on in your thoughts and feelings and behaviors in a truer light. And all of the symptoms and the reflections of ego stupidity you experience become, as I've said before, normalized. They become your abnormal normal, but you don't know it yet. You may think your prism is made up of balance power, flexibility, and vulnerability, but it's not. Because take a closer look at your life and I stare hard into those mirrors of important life areas I've talked about. Now, you've probably been thinking all of my thoughts and behaviors and feelings are connected to truth and reality, because you know yourself to be a fairly smart person and a spiritual person to some extent and are not mentally ill. And you are right about all of that. But unfortunately, knowing those things helps to lock you into your faulty version of reality and the truth about what's really happening, the ego stupidity. You lock onto that faulty reality because up to now, you haven't had an alternative to explain what's going on. But now you do. It's your ego energy. And learning what it is really making up, what it's made up of your ego energy prism. That's the missing piece that can explain what's happening despite your being a smart, spiritual, and mentally well person. It's the source of abnormality in your thoughts and your feelings and behaviors, your ego stupidity, that you're going to need to get to know. It's causing you to see abnormal things as normal rather than abnormal, and to create more symptoms and ego stupidity. That is, creating more and more abnormal normal. And it's something that many of us have done and will need to get to know if we ever do, because most of us have been there or are there, because we all have an ego. And I'm here to help you to move forward and beyond that. Recognizing and understanding your ego energy and how it's affecting you is enlightening and empowering, because you're getting a deeper understanding of the difference between the person you are being and the person you want to be. A great person, living a great life. Okay, now we're going to take a look at some of the specific insights involving higher ego power that are connected to the symptoms and the ego stupidity I described earlier. Higher ego power prevents you from knowing that your love for yourself is based on narcissism, unhealthily inflated self-esteem, and the misperception that you are above others. That's where it's coming from. Nothing out there in the world about you making you better or more important than others. Another specific insight. Higher ego power energy prevents you from knowing that genuine love for yourself has nothing to do with how smart, how attractive, how athletic, how artistic, or rich you are. And that's what's the source of your having difficulty with those things and making them out to be something they are not. Another specific insight, higher ego power has led you to think that giving yourself love strengthens and empowers you, and that giving love to others weakens and disempowers you. That is, the sense of I'm giving away love is giving away power, and that's higher ego power looks at you, has you looking at and thinking of the thoughts and behaviors involving the giving of love in such a dark and negative way. The only thing you want is to receive it. And that's coming from your higher ego power. Another insight, higher ego power prevents you from knowing that your intense desire to be loved is actually a disguised effort to get more power and control. So in a way, it's not really love you want. You want power. You want more control and more empowerment from others than you already have. Another specific insight. Higher ego power is preventing you from knowing that you don't understand love at all. You don't understand love at all. And it's not because you aren't smart and you're not spiritual and you're mentally ill. It's none of that. It's because your higher ego power has led you into that abnormal, normal relationship with the way you understand love. And one more specific insight. Higher ego power has led you to form a strong connection, a very strong one between love, power, and control that blocks you from realizing that loving others is loving yourself. That when we love others, we are loving ourselves. But that's not something you're getting yet. That's a specific insight to be getting that's connected to your higher ego power. We're going to go to our second break. When we return, we're going to talk about the impact on our spiritual wellness for those with higher ego power and their difficulty in loving themselves. You're listening to It's Your Ego Stupid. This is Dr. Nick, and I'll see you after the break.
The Real Conscious Connection. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM.
OMTimes magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. Connect at omtimes.com. OMTimes, creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Hi, Dr. Nick here. I want to invite you to visit my website, egoandspirit.info, where you can find lots of information on ego and download your free ebook copy of It's Your Ego Stupid. Fix it to fix your life. Also, please visit the shop page, where you can find focused ego meditations that can help you know whether you are truly speaking with your voice in your life or ego is speaking for you.
Hello, I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, host of OMTimes Magazine's flagship radio show, What Is Going On? My passion is sifting through information, research and innovations from new thought teachers, speakers and researchers pushing back the boundaries of what we know about life, energy, metaphysics and the universe. I love shifting perceptions about who we are, why we're here, and how quickly impossible becomes normal when we open our minds, expand our awareness, and accept that the only limits that exist are those we place upon ourselves. So if you're the kind of forward-thinking, eager investigator of what lies beyond the current reality that most perceive, why not make a date to come play with me in the field of possibilities at 4 p.m. Pacific Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time every Thursday, and together we can discover what's really going on.
Melissa from Michigan. I work an extra part-time job serving lunch at my child's school, but I still can't afford to put food on our table.
Daniel from California. Choosing whether to pay the rent or pay to fix the car to get to work doesn't leave us with much at all. Now we can't even pay for meals.
Hunger is a story we can end. End it at feedingamerica.org. Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Welcome back. You're listening to It's Your Ego Stupid, a program for intelligent, spiritual, and imperfect people, just like you and me. Now we're going to take a look at how higher ego power can impact our spiritual wellness when it comes to loving ourselves and loving others. The impact I'll be talking about involves gaining distance from being the love God is, the life God is, and the energy God is within our thoughts, words, and deeds when higher ego power is getting in the way of this happening in our life. And so first we're going to talk about being the love God is and ego's impact on it. Being the unconditional, connective, the unburdened and unlimited love that God is within our thoughts and our feelings and our behaviors towards ourselves and with others. People with higher ego power have difficulty being the love God is when narcissism is the basis for loving yourself and wanting others to love you. Engaging in this intense self-admiration, engaging in this infatuation is actually creating difficulty in being the love God is toward yourself and toward others. When we're being the love God is, it does not involve narcissism if you are truly loving yourself. So when that's happening, you're disconnecting from your spirituality and you're less spiritually well. People with higher ego power have difficulty being the love God is when they are placing themselves above others as a means to loving themselves. Oftentimes they are engaging in illusions of inequality, meaning that others are less equal to them, or the illusion of having greater worthiness than maybe others are. Being the love God is doesn't involve loving yourself more than others. And when this is happening, you are disconnecting from your spirituality and you're less spiritually well. Also, people with higher ego power have difficulty being the love God is when failing to recognize that genuine love can only be unconditional, connective, unburdened, and unlimited. Unfortunately, when people are living with love as a form of empowerment and using it as a form of empowerment, it often introduces a conditional quality to love, giving it and receiving it, a disconnective quality to it, a burden quality to it, because again, it's connected to this idea that there's so much of it and I need to get more of it than others are. And it also gets into the realm of things being limited as far as love is concerned with regard to giving it and receiving it from others. And all those are contrary to our ability to be the love God is within our loving words and deeds with others. So being the love God is involves being this love toward yourself and being able to receive it from others and being able to give it to others, being that unconditional, connective, unburdened, and unlimited love, which is difficult for people with higher ego power energy to do. And it shows up in the symptoms that I mentioned earlier in the reflections of ego stupidity. So when those things are actually happening, the symptoms and the ego stupidity, you're in the process of disconnecting from your spirituality and you are less spiritually well. Now we're going to take a look at being the life God is and ego's impact on it. This involves recognizing the presence of God in all life forms, all forms of life, including yourself. And unfortunately, for many times, people with higher ego power, God may have a weakened presence or awareness in their way of looking at things. Or God may be absent totally in the way they go about looking at things because they kind of have substituted themselves for God in some respects. And so this involves our ability to recognize the presence of God in all forms of life, again, including ourselves, and being able to honor it and to respect it at all times and all places. This is, you know yourself as a part of the life God is, as much as everybody else is a part of that life. When people have higher ego power, they have difficulty being the life God is when they are dishonoring others by placing themselves above others as a means to loving themselves, something that I talked about earlier. People they are dishonoring other people. And that's a part of who they are in the way they go about thinking and believing and acting toward other people. Often the illusion of inequality is at work here. Being the life God is involves honoring all others equally as a means to loving yourself in a healthy way. So you must, and we all must, love others as well as we love ourselves in an equal way in order to truly experience the love God is, as well as being the life God is. And when that is happening, when that isn't happening, you are disconnecting from your spirituality and you're less spiritually well. Another reflection of an impact on our spiritual wellness. People with higher ego power have difficulty being the life God is when they dishonor others with notions of their being less worthy of love than the high ego power person is. So they send a message that they are less worthy of being loved and receiving love than the high ego power person is. And again, this is the egoic illusion of unworthiness at work, because being the life God is can only involve knowing that all are equally worthy of love. All are equally worthy of love. And when that's not happening, you're disconnecting from your spirituality and you're less spiritually well. I'm going to mention one more before we talk about the energy God is. People with higher ego power have difficulty being the life God is when you dishonor it with distortions of how much others must love you or the way they must love you. These are conditions, again, these distortions placed upon love. And there's a dishonoring quality to this, and you're dishonoring the life God is within the actions and experiences of being loving. Because being the life God is does not involve dishonoring it with the distortions of love intended only to empower you. And when you're doing that, you are disconnecting from your spirituality and you're less spiritually well. Last today, we're going to talk about being the energy God is and ego's impact on it. This involves recognizing the availability of healing and transformative energy within your being when you're being guided by the light of truth and understanding, human and divine. So you're being guided by the healing and transformation. It exists within your being, and it comes to the fore when you're guided by the light of truth and understanding. We all have 3 million years of evolution involving the energy God is, and it's woven into our being. It is part of our design. It's part of our endowment. But this healing and transformation can be what I call be placed on pause when our ego energy is unhealthy. And the following things will reflect when that's happening. But you might have a question, who releases that pause button if it's been pressed? And the answer is, well, it's not ego, because ego doesn't know about this pause button. And God doesn't release it directly, because God doesn't make choices on who should be healing and transforming and who shouldn't be, although there can be spiritual tools that many people choose to use, involving things like meditation and prayer and mindfulness practice, and things, yoga, things that are meant to help us get to a healthier place in our being. No, and life doesn't release it, because oftentimes the transformational event or person may not enter into our life that maybe brings about significant change. So the answer to the question, who releases the pause button, is we do. And we do it with the use of ego medicine. Okay, here are a few reflections or indications of spiritual impact brought about on our spiritual wellness involving this being the energy God is. People with higher ego power have difficulty being the energy God is when healing and transformation are being weakened by self-absorption with being loved by yourself and others. So in a way, here ego has pressed the pause button on your healing and transformation, and you must release it with what I'm sharing with you. So being the energy God is involves this natural healing and transformation in which you love yourself just for being you. Gee, I wonder who said that. Maybe Mr. Rogers. And when this isn't happening, you're disconnecting from your spirituality and you're less spiritually well. Also, people with higher ego power have difficulty being the energy God is when their healing and transformation are weakened by notions that you are more worthy of love than others are. Well, being the energy God involves healing and transformation that can only happen, that can only occur when you know that all are equally worthy of love. And when we fail to do that, the healing and transformation stops. It pauses. So when this is happening, you are disconnecting from your spirituality and you're less spiritually well. And one more spiritual impact. People with higher ego power have difficulty being the energy God is when healing and transformation are weakened by thinking that love is owed to you. When you think that love is owed to you, this is pausing your healing and transformation, because being the energy God is involves healing and transformation in which you know love cannot be owed to you and must be freely given. But when this is happening, you're disconnecting from your spirituality and you're less spiritually well. As we move toward the end of today's program, I want to offer you a frame of reference for knowing when you're healing from higher ego power and are healthily loving yourself and others. When you're healing your higher ego power, this is what your voice will be speaking. All of the symptoms and the ego stupidity I referred to earlier was when ego was speaking for you and through you. This is now your voice as you are healing. An excerpt from The Two Voices Within. I have fallen out of love with myself. Previously, I had seen only what I wanted to see and was blind to the thoughts, words, and deeds I did not want to see. I had felt I could only do right and no wrong in my own eyes and those of others. I felt I was above and more important than others, a person whose needs always had to be served. I could see now how others' love for me was tainted by my needs for power. The love from others was distorted by my demands for it, and often offered in fear rather than genuine love. A love that could never be freely given to me due to my needs for power. A love with a purpose and not to be freely given or received. A love used as a commodity for my empowerment. I can now like and love myself and others in healthy ways, without conditions attached to false empowerment. The love I have to offer within being the love God is now freely given to others. I ask nothing in exchange for it. I recognize all people as equally important, with none lesser or greater than myself. I recognize God's presence within each of them and how we share that endowment. I am my brothers and sisters' keeper. Their needs are mine and mine are theirs. We are empowered within our unity, not within separation. I recognize the gift of life each has been given, and want to celebrate theirs as well as mine. A celebration that can only be known when all are treated as equal. I now understand that I can only know empowerment through the service I offer to others, not only to myself. Again, the words of your voice when healing from higher ego power. As we leave our focus on higher ego power and loving yourself, please give some thought to the symptoms, ego stupidity, and insights, as well as spiritual impact I've shared with you. We have reached the end of today's program. I hope what I've shared with you about the symptoms, ego stupidity, and so on can serve as a dose of ego medicine, allowing you to love yourself and others in healthy ways. Our program next week will focus on lower ego flexibility and difficulty loving ourselves and others. These are people who think they have all the right views about what love is, where to find it, and who can share it. We'll be looking at the symptoms, the ego stupidity, and the insights needed in order to heal it with ego medicine. I want to end today's program with this message. The great news is that working to heal your ego energy using ego medicine, and by growing your awareness of its symptoms, ego stupidity, and insights, and spiritual impact will allow the divine truth in your being to flow and to shine through you and allow you to fully embrace each of the divine gifts. The spiritual part of your healing is given. It's part of your endowment. I want to thank you for listening and allowing me to be your servant. I want you to have a great week, and please come back to my next program. In peace and love, this is Dr. Nick saying goodbye for now.